Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. My guest today is the brilliant Brian O'Neill. Brian's a consulting product designer who helps companies create innovative ML and analytics solutions. His goal is to help companies leverage the innovative power of design and UX to ensure investments in data-driven software actually produce real value in a human-centered way. I hope you enjoy this episode, and please do like, share, and leave your feedback. Thank you for listening. Brian O'Neill, thank you very much for joining me on the Data Strategy Show today. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward.
No, I think we've had a really good little chat before we started, so we are buzzing slightly and fits of laughter. But listen, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to date.
Well, my journey today was from the bed to the same as yesterday and the day before.
Yes.
My longer term journey. Well, I'm a trained classical and jazz musician, and that's my degree in schooling and all that is in music. So that's one of my careers, and I still do that. That's what all the stuff is. Whenever everyone's like, "Oh, look at your background," it's like, "Well, I'm in the studio." That's one of my jobs.
Yeah.
You know. And then my other job is, I was a product designer, and I still am a product designer, but a lot of the work I'm doing now is helping non-designers learn how to become better designers, because I'm of the design camp, which is not necessarily the majority idea that anybody that's making solutions for people, and since we're talking about data, we're really talking about software at some point. That's the final expression of a lot of the work that we do. That there's no non-designers, there's no non-design choices. Someone is making a decision. It's just how informed it is through the lens of what we would call it intentionality, right? And so can we help data professionals and data product people get better at that? So while I still do consulting work and I do help companies, typically it's more on the technology companies, software companies, where the product is software as opposed to the product is a hospital network that has applications inside, analytics solutions and all of that, where it's internal tooling. I still help consult on that side, but in the last couple years, I've started running a seminar that I teach, and a lot of it's to try to bring better design and product thinking skills to non-designers, because there's such as I'm sure you probably know, there's just a very high failure rate in this industry with putting out stuff that doesn't produce any value, and a lot of it I think comes from the focus on making outputs instead of outcomes.
Yep.
And so when we try to align around outcomes, it changes our thinking process, and inherently we have to think about user experience, which gets back to kind of human-centered design. And as I always say, there's no such a business or a government is a collection of people. There's no entity that is the business. It's still human beings doing stuff, right? Doing work, using software, doing their job, whatever it may be. And so that is still the final factor in all the work that we do. And we build these giant infrastructures out and all this plumbing and data quality and data governance and da-da-da-da. And it all comes down to like emails, PDFs, dashboards, applications, a few different expressions of this stuff. And right there is like, that's the moment where, something hits the fan or you succeed. It's like, that's where it happens. And so I'm of the thinking that we need to work backwards from the human point and figure out how do we make sure that this is useful and usable and valuable to the people, the humans that are in the loop, if there's going to be humans in the loop. And even when we're talking about automation, so, it's not really fully automated. It's not like completely walk away and never see it again. Like what happens when COVID hits? What happens when models go off the rails because, the model's not smart enough to know COVID is happening outside, So that's kind of my philosophy, is that if we don't help people become better makers or designers, and the goal is not to make everyone a capital designer, but it's just to bring some of the skills that I think designers bring to problem solving. And if we can kind of get that going in the organization, I think there's a big win there. We ask a lot more why questions. We're thinking more about outcomes instead of outputs. We're focused on people instead of like, I checked my code in, it was on time, we finished the scrum on time, the easy to measure metrics that make us feel like we're doing stuff You know, they're easy to
Yeah.
track and all of that. Like
Yep.
it's that's doesn't you don't get credit for that. I mean, you can get credit for that, and a lot of people, and especially big companies, you do get credit for that, for just checking the box and, I did my part. It's not my
Yeah, I
job.
delivered my component or whatever it
Yeah.
might be. Yeah.
So, well, whose job is it then? And I think someplace, I'm teaching a private seminar right now, and I think the attitude that a leader in analytics or data science will have is that I want to change the thinking of my people. I want to get us thinking about this stuff, because it's kind of everybody's job, and at some point you start to put in maybe a little bit more formal process. You might have a product owner. We were just literally talking about this yesterday in the seminar about, in order to do data science, you need all this enabling technology, right? And maybe you need like some kind of data cleansing tool. And then it's the question of, well, do we build a data cleansing tool for this forecasting sales project we're doing? Or do we build one for the future for all of the forecasting stuff that we do? And now you're like talking about building out a piece of software that in the commercial world we would call a product.
Yes.
Right. And so it becomes this question of like, well, how much of this thing do we bite off? Like, is it for the short term, or do we think about a platform to do this? And so I think design can be applied to that too, even if we're not talking about a heavy user interface component. The act of problem solving with design helps us think through, how might we do that? And so like this particular team that's in my center right now is the first, one of the modules we do is how to do qualitative research, how to interview customers, how to go learn what it's like to be somebody else, so that you can fit your work into their workflow. And so this a lot of the BI solution leads, software architects, they're coming up with the script and the questions to go interview their own data science counterparts to understand how can we accelerate the work you do, because they spend so much time not doing data sciencey stuff.
Yeah, data cleansing or whatever it might be. Or,
Right. And that's smart, right? Because now they're thinking about how do we accelerate their work, and we're trying to get them focused on high value work that only a limited number of people know how to do. So that, proof of values and proof of concepts can come out faster and all of that. So it can be applied to non interface heavy things as well. The thinking process, the act of, innovation, moving in small increments, trying to learn rapidly, to work in low fidelity, to get feedback quickly, all these kinds of principles. So I'm really liking this, because my personal mission, is really to try to infect the data community with the power of design to create better value and better solutions for people. It's just it's also a lot more fun to work on stuff people that they care about, right? So there's never going to be enough designers to do all this work. You really need to change how all the peers work. So a lot of our role is being kind of a facilitator of what the group does. It's not about one person owning it. It's really, how do I facilitate a group of people to get the right bodies in the room, the domain expert, the product person, the technology person who's there to, it's this, I kind of see this like amoeba. We're all interconnected, and like the tech person's pulling it back to reality. This is reality over here. And the designer's like, this is what users really want. And this business person's like, we have this much time. Here's the strategy. We have to show this. And it's a nice natural tug if you have those, if you have the right people in the room, this kind of inner ring stakeholders, as I call them. So anyhow, we're kind of babbling, but like that's kind of my current mission.
You know what? We just talked about everything.
And done. So blah blah blah.
No, listen.
It's not my history either. That was completely
no,
different
and
question,
gosh, don't go into your history.
Go read my bio if you want that.
There's a lot of stuff that I wrote down in there, but I think I'm going to cut to what you've got on your LinkedIn profile. You've got a slogan on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Your
Drink
analytics.
Beer. No.
Hey, well,
Drink beer.
Drink beer. Yes. I thought you said root beer. I thought, oh my goodness, it's not bad enough for you. Your analytics ML or AI product will fail if users can't or won't use your solution. I get that, right? I understand with the preamble that you've just talked about. Yeah. But what are the stark challenges that most organizations have in this area? Because I can walk into companies, as you know, I do when asked to come in work with them from a data strategy point of view. But I often wander into the world of designs or product or dashboards, and
Yeah.
I see some really bad stuff that's been developed. And typically,
Yeah.
I'll ask how many people are using that, and they'll look at their monthly stats or whatever management console,
Yeah.
and it's zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are the biggest challenges here? Why are we still in this?
Wait, that's a pretty
rut?
big challenge.
Well,
Wait
that's
a
one of
second.
the
Isn't
challenge,
that?
but why?
Do we
is
need
that
to go any
challenge
further than nobody used it?
But why is that challenge there? Come on, this
Yeah.
is 2021. Dashboards have
Sure.
not been around since last year. They've been around forever.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
as much as I can remember. The early 90s.
Sure.
But I know it's.
Do you want the? Go ahead.
I want your stark opinion. I don't.
Sure. Sure.
Don't sugarcoat it.
So. Okay. Here's my start. I would say it differs a little bit based between like what I see in an analytics product from like a commercial software company or a place that's selling either insights or information intelligence, or they're an enabler of that kind of stuff. A lot of times, if the telemetry is in the product and it's commercial, the situation is that we're trying to show everybody everything. We have all this stuff and it's theoretically of value, so it's a volume problem, and it's not well designed at all. They're not designing around use cases. A lot of times the need of the business is not there because they're so focused on the display of the telemetry and like data visualization and all of this. And data visualization is important, but you can properly render a chart out that is not useful to the context that it's like. It's the right kind of a visualization for the wrong problem. Like no one needs this, but you've done a great job. If someone ever needed to do that, you did a great job of expressing it visually.
Right.
This is why I don't think design and data visualization are the same thing. Data viz is one chapter of it, and these things get kind of thrown in the same bucket sometimes. Both are very important, but this thinking that we just need to increase data visualization does not account for things like how do we test the quality of the design, and how do we do research to inform the use cases behind this, and thinking about things like workflows is often missing, right? Most dashboards are seen as I think they're seen as like an endpoint. Like you come to the screen, load it up, look at it, and then you go make a decision.
Well, most people just look at it.
Yeah, and so there might even be a decision, but so often there's a workflow. They might be moving between tools. They may be trying to, I need this data, but I need it in my spreadsheet so I can compare it to this other thing. And that's not how we design it. Instead, a JIRA ticket comes in and says, I need field T_12K. Do you have that annually? Sure, I have it annually, and I'll put it in the table and throw it back at you. And it's self-service, right? Well, that's the act of giving people what they said they wanted. And I think design is about going out and uncovering the unarticulated problems that are never going to be neatly written up in a Word doc or a JIRA ticket or whatever. That's the first part, is this kind of question and response model that I think some internal data teams have. We're there to serve the business, but they take it as kind of like fulfill the orders that come in.
So they're just order takers.
It's kind of like, it's like, well, that's what I was trained to do, and I get that. And I think the change happens is when someone comes in and says, no, I want my team we can't just be operating like this because it's clearly not working. As you said, there's no one looking at the dashboard. No one's looking at these dashboard reports, I mean, right there you have some analytics on analytics, right? I think also, how do we measure the quality of the work that we just did? Like, and maybe how can we prevent creating the wrong thing in the first place? But things like usability evaluation, which requires you to establish what are the tasks and goals and activities someone's going to use this design for before you design it.
Yes,
you could theoretically run it after, but like
no.
You know what,
but the horse is bolted, right? I mean, it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, but sometimes that's where I start, because it's like, in order to get ahead, we first need to understand where we are. So let's run a test, which actually sometimes forces us to go decide what the product or solution was for in the first place. And sometimes you go all the way through the process of getting a script ready to and you already realize, wow, this thing is so far off. Like, it doesn't answer any of these questions.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
it doesn't.
yeah.
But now we know what we were really setting out to do. This is what this person needed to do for this data to matter. So maybe we don't need to go test this because we all have a pretty good hunch, and the quant metrics say no one's using it, and we have this gut feeling that our thing does not answer this stuff. Maybe we can start a new thing or whatever, and it's a learning process. You know,
How many of those people actually do that? That's the issue right there, right? I mean, it's almost like,
Sure.
well, I've built the product. Here it is.
yeah, yeah,
And I often find it's very much it, as you said earlier, it's a very reactive mode. But equally, the infusion of design thinking, perhaps, or design motivation into a, let's face it, into a already made product like I don't know, Tableau or Click or Power BI, right? It's there. The design, the dashboard developer is just going to go, yeah, you want to, yeah, okay, pie chart, yeah, that looks good, you know, blah blah blah,
yeah,
and then, you know, oh yeah, because the dashboard's done it. I've created my data model. I've put everything on the screen, and you know, somebody's come along and said, that looks beautiful, wonderful, I really love it. I mean, that's the kind of metric that people are akin to, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you think it's good? It's beautiful? Yeah, I love it. It's got bright colors, and hell, you know, that's great. Thank you, brilliant, and off we go.
Yeah.
And that person, you know, so there's a big, massive communication gap here.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning. How do we rein that back in? And I'm sure you must have some kind of tools or frameworks that help people, you know, even before they sort of say, well, you know, what's the actions or decisions or business questions? What's the first thing that somebody really needs to do when they sit down with a business user or the technology or this kind of triumvirate that you talked about earlier, this amoeba? What's the first things that they really need to get out on the table, the practical elements to say, right, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to work together, because it's more about sort of behavior change, and you know, it's more about behavioral stuff before we get into any of the design, even the data, I would say.
Yeah, well, a couple of things to unpack there. So so first of all, when I use the term design, some people call this design thinking, and they'll make the argument that it's not the same thing as design. To me, these are the same thing. I actually really like to talk about design doing, because I don't want people just thinking about it, but I understand the point of this was really a marketing way to enable, and this came out of IDEO, I believe, right? Was to make design feel like it's something that non-designers can do, and kind of take the black box and the black turtlenecks out of it, and all of that, which is great. And I think from a storytelling and marketing perspective, it's done a good job. And I love seeing this when I meet other data people, and it's kind of like, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod. When you see, like, you know, I'm a chief AI officer at whatever, design thinking advocate, there's a wink wink, and it's kind of like you're in the club, and the club's open to everyone. Yeah, it's not actually a private club. It's just like, I get it, and I've seen how this helps, right? And I think research research always feels like this slow thing, and we don't get anything out of it. But customer research, and when I say customer, I'm talking about the end user of the solution, whether they're an employee or whatever it is, right? If you're not having regular exposure to these people on a regular basis, you're never really going to change your team. And if this show is targeted at management and executives, like, if you really want to change the mindset, we have to let go of the idea that I'm only here to use the technical skills I learned in school or my last job, and my job is just to do modeling. My job is just to do dashboard development. Fine, but whose job is it to make sure that a positive outcome comes out of that? Whose job is it to make sure that what is being asked of us to create is actually something that's needed, and that we can express this in a way to a user that they will get that value out of it? The promise was sort of made, or the promise is in the head, but there are structured ways to go do this. Design provides us recipes to do this. So I think research is important, and there's kind of two factors to this. There's the type of research we do, which is, and when I say research, I'm really talking about usually what I advocate for this kind of 2-on-1 interview format. One note taker, one
Right.
interview. You're the interviewer.
Yep.
Imagine someone next to you taking notes about our conversation. I'm the user. You're interviewing me. You're mostly listening.
Yeah.
It's and this is the other thing of sometimes data people may be stereotyping, but a little bit on the shyer side, more reserved. Well, guess what? You don't have to talk a lot. You actually just need to learn how to ask good open-ended questions. And the goal here is to start developing some empathy for the person we're serving here, and to understand what their world is like, their attitudes, how are they using stuff now, how could we make it better. And you're also there to learn about the things you never knew to ask about, because they don't write down the very obvious things they do every day. They don't talk about that stuff. They don't even think to tell you, like, well, I do use Tableau, but I always copy and paste the table into my Excel thing over here. They're not going to think to tell you this kind of stuff, and they're not going to map it out in a perfect user story and drop it in your Scrum project.
Exactly.
They just don't think that way. We have to observe that.
Yes.
We have to go out and see this,
Yeah.
and ask questions and get, why are you doing this?
And
why
tease
are you
that
doing
out
that?
of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that kind of project level research, and the other side is, I think teams need to be doing ongoing research. That's the kind where it's like, when I was a staff designer, I was just telling this team that I'm coaching right now, when I was a staff designer at JP Morgan, we were part of the small active trader brokerage. And part of our job requirements as a user experience team was to go spend, I think it was an hour or 2 hours a week on the trading desk with a headset on, just like you're wearing.
Oh, wow.
Listening to calls coming in. We were there both to see how the traders use the trading platform on the because we had the consumer side application, but then there's the software the actual JP Morgan traders use to place phone trades.
Right.
But we're also there to get to know the types of customers that this brokerage had, just to hear their attitudes and the types of trades they placed. And are they in a hurry? Are they there to kind of chit chat? Are they game players? Are they investors? Options. One thing we learned, options traders, that's almost like gambling. It's almost a game. It's a strategy game. It's very different than the mindset of like a retirement oriented investor or someone who's kind of slowly playing the market and stocks. Options is a completely different thing. But if you didn't know that, you would just say options is a different kind of trade that you place. Right. It's just it's like, that's all it is. Here's a technical difference. The trade ticket needs to look like this instead of that. All of that gets lost if you don't understand that this person is kind of playing a game here. And so how does that change in the experience that we give? Well, one thing we learned, I don't want help docs. I don't need training. I don't need you to tell me what a butterfly spread is when I'm loading up my trade ticket or whatever. Don't show me that stuff. Like, it's kind of insulting. Like, I know what I'm doing, right? And these kinds of soft things sound like, okay, well, whatever. What does that mean to, like, sometimes to technically minded person? Well, guess what? It's the 100 of these little tiny things that equals good design. It's the little tiny things you do all over the place that start to equate to, God, this thing is so easy to use. It's so intuitive. Just these little things that start to pile up. I mean, there's the big stuff, which is like, I don't even know what this chart means. Like, that's a macro level problem. But the kind of things where it's like, wow, they put an embedded link right to here and it downloads the spreadsheet and it's in exactly the format I needed to do this other thing. Like, how did they know that I needed these columns added together or whatever, because it felt like it anticipated all this. And guess how we got to that? It's because we went out and talked to the customers and we learned something. We understood their workflow and we understood what will it take to make a decision with this information, or whatever that next. There's always a next step, right? There's never really an end.
Yeah.
There's always another thing they're going to go do.
And you're right. I think the whole area of empathy is so underplayed. And I think that's in all facets, in all parts of companies. It's almost like I've got my bit to do, and I know that someone else, the BA, for example, is going to take the user requirements or build an epic or whatever it might be, and this person is going to do that, and blah blah blah. So it's almost like the technology companies who have made these things have given the rules for when they should for how things should be developed. And sometimes
how so? I didn't follow that.
No, I meant as in, here's the tool, here's here's the the application that you need to roll out. Now
Yeah.
you need to have this person, you need to have that person, you need to have this person, and it's almost like, well, you know, that element of a dashboard or whatever product it might
Yeah.
be, it seems to have either branched into a whole industry, an army of people that need to be around it. And therefore, when you go into organizations, you do often find, the sort of, okay, you've got the warehouse developer, you've got the dashboard designer, you've got the
Yeah.
ETL person, you've got this, you've got that, you've got the data scientist, and everybody's trying, data scientists now trying to build visualizations. I mean, it's crazy,
Yeah.
so, okay, they may need to as an output, but surely there's a way that we can somehow reduce the noise in order for it to be a lot more sensible and pragmatic in the way that we do this thing. So you talked about workflow earlier. How do you embed the notion of workflow into this world of product design, or maybe is it the product owner who sits there and says this is how it's going to work, and the flow of everything goes in a particular way, and then that design element starts to be triggered in other areas. So how does that work between those people, those amoebas that you talked about?
Are you asking whose job it is, or how do we use workflow knowledge to make a better design? Or
Yeah, I think there's two questions there. Yeah, I think it's how do we use the workflow to make better design? Because as you said, it doesn't end. There's always another step, another decision.
Yeah.
But to rein it back in, when we first start on this journey of building a beautiful product, often called, who, as in the amoeba space, should be driving that, and should there be this thing called we often get all of these weird and wonderful terms, the data translator. Now it's the biggest thing, sliced bread for, and everybody's talking about it. So who drives it, and then how do you embed that across? Because workflow is not only just a technical element, it's a human condition in terms of how we do handoffs between each other as well. So
yeah. So a couple things to unpack here. The first one is that I think even in the very mature product and design driven organizations, design is still everybody's job. And so things like getting technical people exposed to end customers on a regular basis, whether they're conducting interviews or they're watching, like in the observation room when we're doing a 1 hour lunch study with somebody.
Right.
The good teams have that exposure time built into the culture.
Okay.
Because if you have all the heads are seeing people struggle to use stuff, when you've spent a year on your fraud detection model and you're talking to the phone support rep and they're like, I don't really answer, I don't do anything with that, I just wait for someone to call from the credit card company and then we deal with it because there's too many of them. Well, guess what? The $1 million fraud thing model that you had that flagged stuff early, they don't give a crap because they they can't handle. Apparently, there's too many, and I'm making this up, but this is actually based on a real thing that someone. I was talking to a guy on LinkedIn. He said we spent major retailer spent whatever $1 million on this thing 6 months, and it never got used, and it was very accurate at predicting fraudulent charges. But the business just was letting them go through.
Wow.
And they're like, we'll just wait until kind of the escalation point where a phone call comes in and then deal with it. Why was this thing built? Just to show that we can
just to show that we can.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
what is the outcome?
Yeah.
And
there
the
is.
Team,
yeah.
It's not just. It's not written down in what I call a design actionable way that everybody on the team can answer and or understand in plain English. So there needs to be some type of measurable, either progress criteria or success criteria built into the project. How will we know if we did a good job or not? How will the user's life be better? Literally, like their life, and I mean their work life, but like how will we impact this customer? Will someone in finance, like are we making the accounting easier? Like what is the way we would measure that? Understanding that and saying that is the thing we're actually going to go measure. It takes away the focus on the dashboard, because now it's about, did John or Jane or whoever it is, did they have that transformation? Did it make their life easier? Did we see a reduction in the time to go figure out what number do I type into this field on the tax form or whatever? Like,
No, but you're right.
That's how we do it.
Because that's the tangible thing at the end, isn't it? That's
Yes.
the bit which let's be clear here. The product is the product. The output, the whatever, if it's a score from a model or whatever it might be, that's great. But that's that's just a scoring mechanism. That's just an output that says, right, now we've got this output. Where does it go? But often most people focus on that as the output. And it's a little bit like what I say. Most of us, when I go in and do data strategy, everybody's focused on data. And I say, well, I don't want to talk about data. I want to talk about the why. I want to talk about the purpose of what you want to do with it. So it's almost like what you're saying is the same thing. You want to talk to them about the purpose, whether that could be for Jane or John or whoever. But it needs to have a business context, and it needs to have an overriding factor of this thing is going to reduce calls coming in, reclaim, leakage of revenue, whatever it might be, blah, blah, blah. And that's our goal. So is there something that we have to kind of get and codify in terms of the language now, in terms of the way that design elements have to be, the semantic layer and how we all talk to each other in that sense? Because it's happening time and time again. 6 months spent on a model for fraud detection. It must be a beautiful model, and no one uses it.
So a couple things here. You talked about do you have to understand the business goals and all of that? Absolutely, but here's the thing that I still like. This is the point I think I want to hammer home. The business is a bunch of people.
Yes.
So you don't ever escape from the user experience piece if there are humans in the loop in the system. And even if you're deploying an automated system, you're talking about change. You're talking about a cultural change that happens. I am not an expert in that particular area, but design can bleed into that, because designers, we're always trying to figure out, how do I slide, especially if it's something new, how do I slide this thing into the natural way they already work, instead of trying to ask them to come over here, exit your normal thing, use this new brand thing you've never heard of before, and then go back to your other thing. And we think our job is to create this little island over here. And it's not. It's also the infrastructure to get to the island. It's the bridges. It's the steamships. It's all of that stuff is part of it. Or I should say, it needs to be part of it. And if it's not, you're going to have a bunch of little islands and silos of perhaps very good, what I call technically right, effectively wrong work, right? And model accuracy is not the most important thing. And I've had 50 interviews on my own podcast about this. And the people who are very senior in this space will repeatedly tell me about how usually interpretability, there's a big trade-off. People are willing to give a good trade-off on accuracy to understand how does it work, to let me play with the tool. If it's a forecasting tool, I need to understand how it works before I will give it any credibility and consider changing based on what it says. So it's not a game of getting to 91%. And my joke for this is, if you're still thinking academically in school, 51%, 60% accuracy, that's a failure in class. And it could be a complete business win. In a business context, that could be a home run for the business.
It could mean, an extra million. It could be,
absolutely.
in revenue somewhere. Or it could be, cost saving, which could be the same, right? I get it. I completely understand.
What game are we playing? That's the thing. And I think sometimes the very technically skilled people in this field, and this is, to me, is really a management problem, because technical skill is part of it, but it's not the only skill required to design data-driven solutions that people will actually use. There's other skills required. You can either hire those skills or you can develop them. I find a lot of places are not ready to go throw a bunch of money and bring designers in and human factors people and UX people, because they can't sometimes even grok, like it just doesn't compute, where it's like, we're not really building a lot of custom software here, so they don't connect it. And so my thing is, like,
fit for them.
No, it doesn't feel normal. So my thing is, there are people that have spent enough time building stuff that does not get used, and they're tired of it. And it's usually,
of course,
a manager and executive who's done it before the wrong way, and they're like, I'm not repeating that again at my next job. We're gonna change the culture here from the start. and they're starting to see that the outcome versus output kind of mentality. How do we do that? It's not better technical skills. Most of the people have that stuff.
Of course they do.
You know, they're great at that stuff. You know, it's the other stuff that they're not great at. So, you know, and I think they can do it. And here, my other final rant on this is that I think that design is not a zero-sum game. It's not like ML ops where it's like, okay, we're going to actually leave data engineering out, but we're going to do all the other stuff. Or we're going to leave out training data, but we're going to do all the other stuff. Fail, 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 fail. Well, guess what? With design, you could say, you know, we don't really have time to do any prototyping, but we're going to do a little research. Win. We only have time to do a little bit of usability testing. We're not going to like stop the ship. We've already committed. Fine. Can we agree to do a test to see how we did? Yes, fine. Win. You get a win for doing little bits of it and starting to increase that.
But that's the whole incremental kind of view, isn't it? Because you want to build on that. And you know, as I think this is where we often talk about the dreaded last mile, the bit which, you know, we've come to a point.
I love the last mile.
That's
like my home. That's like my.
That is your home turf. That's your hood, right? Yeah, the last mile is your hood. Seriously, I know. I mean, you know,
it's the first part, though. Really, if in my recipe, it's actually the beginning of the project. It's envisioning the last at the beginning. But go on.
Yeah, but the last mile is often where things get stuck.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're saying is, if you are doing that upfront piece of work, if you are doing that bit of research, you're thinking more longer, you know, in the game, and you're kind of saying, this is how we're going to produce it at the end, but I need to do this increment before I get into that view, and I completely understand where that is going. But then you talk about, you know, something else. Again, you talk about execution without strategy is expensive and time consuming. You're going to build up technical debt, lose the trust of your sponsors and customers, and shorten the amount of time and resources you have to go back and design something that will produce value. So this is the whole point. I think I call it analytical debt, you know, because whether technical or analytical debt, whatever, it doesn't matter. So, you know, how do you start to get CEOs, or where are you pitching to? Are you pitching to the chief data officer and saying you need to have more, you know, a better UX person in here, or you need to get a better storyteller, or you need to get a better I don't know, human-centered design expert, or whatever it might be? I know you said they don't want to do that, but how are you getting that out there to say this really needs to be a game changer if you are going to really play a different game, and the outcomes are going to be, you know, better for you in the long run?
Sure. Well, let me. I want to step back to one previous thing that you said. You know, the research part was the beginning of that journey. Yeah. But when you talked about, like, you know, preventing the technical debt and all this kind of stuff, part of the way we do this in design is that we focus on prototyping and moving as fast as possible and lowest fidelity possible to be getting stuff visual quickly, whether it's workflow schematics, whether it's a wireframe of a dashboard, whether it's actually a working, it's an Excel spreadsheet with realistic data, not real data pulled in from a source, but enough to get a conversation going with the user to say, are these columns right? Should we make an index out of these 10 fields? Should we do XYZ? How would you use this next? The focus there is on prototyping and learning quickly what is working so that we don't overinvest in the technology piece too soon. That is how you do this. And these are things that designers are good at, but it's stuff that we can train. If we can get our technical people to put the tools down for a minute and work in a different tool set, take the crayons, not the code, and let's work differently here for a bit.
Are you getting there with them? Are you, you know, can you drop the code and take the crayons or are you trying to bring them up to a more, you're obviously trying to bring them up to a more conceptual level, right?
Well, the goal actually isn't conceptual. Like, I mean, the way it's like, do you want to spend a lot of time building the wrong stuff? Like, this is really, if the short-term way to think about this is this will reduce your technical debt, whatever kind of debt you want to call it. This will prevent you from building too much of the wrong stuff. That's not the ultimate. The ultimate value is better user experience so that the data stuff, the solutions we're building actually get used and adopted. That's the strategic vision for what's really the big pot of gold, right? But depending on who I'm talking to, it's like, well, if you really just care about this, it's like, well, how did it feel to build those 10 dashboards last year that no one's using? It's just like, and you can say, well, they didn't know what they wanted.
Well,
Not because you did a poor job, but because
Yeah.
oftentimes they didn't state the problem clearly. You didn't really know what they wanted. They said they wanted this. You're like, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what they asked for. And I gave them what they asked for, and I did a good job on it. It's like, well, would you like to go figure out what it is that they actually want and participate in that? And not every person is going to be great at that. But I think part of this is as a leader, as a manager, is to understand which of my people
Is good
feel
at
like
doing that.
they're ready to make that change and to leave the tableau or to leave the modeling work or to whatever their thing is that they're good at technically. And often I think it's people who have been through enough swings at the plate and they've felt the pain of spending a long time building stuff that never went anywhere. It didn't feel innovative, and they're open to trying something different. That's often the way you slide it in.
Yeah.
You know. So and I try to pull with my work instead of push. I don't do a lot of like pitching a CEO. You need this. I don't know what they need. I can ask them questions about like, are you having trouble getting any value out of all this work that you're doing with data?
Yes.
Are the projects shipping on time, and do they produce the outcome that was intended? Like, what happened? Where did they fail?
If no one's measuring that, then how
What's
are
that?
they going to know? If no one's
Someone's
measuring
it. You don't think
Where?
anyone's?
Yeah.
You don't think somene's measuring it, whether
I
it's
don't-
qualitatively or quantitatively?
I don't know, and I don't
think
think
heads
they
are. I don't know.
I-
I've heard mixed things about like heads are the gravy train for like a data science team. Here's an unlimited bucket of money.
Oh, no,
Just
no,
hire
those
whatever
days are
you.
gone. You're right.
It's gone.
No, I think
So-
you're right. I think in the States, maybe there's a lot
Yeah.
more of that. And I've heard through
Sure.
many colleagues out in the US that the data scientists or the analytics teams and so on are being questioned as to their,
Yeah.
you know, are you actually producing anything for us? Are you
Yeah.
doing your job
Yep.
in the way that we want you to do it? Which, you know, I knew it was, you know, essentially a lot of us knew it was going to get to that point because, as you said, you give them money and they play in this nice little sandbox forever, and nothing gets really out there
Yep.
into the wild west, so to speak, and they're not
Yeah.
using it, and there's no feedback mechanisms, and then it's just,
Yeah.
well, you're just playing with tech, you know. So what are you actually doing?
Yep.
And I heard companies are getting rid of their teams, and you know, and just saying, right, we're gonna do it differently. So maybe it's
Yeah.
great opportunity for you in that sense, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a lot of people. But it's very sad that it's come to this, in terms of, you know.
I agree with that. I think that, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we kind of generalize the organizations, right? But people are at different maturity levels and different places with all of this kind of stuff. And I think the people that I like to work with are the ones that start to realize that our technical ability is not really the thing that's holding us up here. We're really good at the technical part.
Yeah.
We're not so good at this other part. We know there's a challenge. There's this business IT divide that you hear a lot about. That's part of the problem, is the structure of this. The irony of that I think here is sometimes it's like these traditional companies worry about the startups of the world and the tech companies and all of this. And I'm like, if you're so worried, why don't you copy the way that they build products? And it's like they like to pick and choose. Well, they're using Snowflake, so we're whatever. Like, well, what about the fact that they have a product manager who's like managing this thing with a different lens instead of a project, and they have design and user experience people, even on the machine learning teams, for a reason, to make sure that expensive data science work from your very talented, rare people that you don't have a lot of actually gets out into the world, because they don't know all the human factors piece and all of that. That's not what they're there to do primarily. But in some places you don't have that. And so my thing is, then it's somebody's job. And if you're willing to make this a little bit of everybody's job, and then at some point you might say, you know what, we really need to bring in and hire an expert or hire a team to own this now. We at least kind of know what we don't know now. We know that we need to be doing this more. We see the value in it, but we can't do all that and our regular job. Then at that point, I think it's like, well, now it sounds like you need to hire a team, or you need to bring some extra resource in to do that. But they first have to accept that there's something wrong. I don't go tell someone that it's wrong. I think they have to feel that it's not working.
They have to. I mean, that feeling can come it can come from the questions, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
It can come from things like, hey, listen, are you really getting value from this kind of product? What's
Yeah.
it doing for the business? How is it helping I don't know, Jolene and Henry to do whatever they needed to get done? And
Right.
suddenly that's where somebody perks up and says, well, aren't we measuring that?
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was you, but maybe it was you. It was quite funny when we spoke earlier, not today, but previously. You called something the toilet of metrics. Was that you?
The metrics toilet.
The metrics toilet. That was it. Yeah. I just, that came up because we're talking about metrics. I was thinking, oh, didn't he say something about the toilet, metrics toilet? Tell me a little bit about that. What is that all about?
That
well, I
was
guess
from
I know, but
one of my earliest analytics clients, the CEO. That's what he called, I think, his own
metrics
product.
toilet.
Like, this is a metrics toilet. Like, and I was like, and he had understood that, like, we're shoveling telemetry at our customers. Like, we're just shoveling, and this was a monitoring tool that monitored, thousands of nodes, and it had telemetry on every node, had its millions of all its data, just shovel, slice it and dice it. Here's every metric possible. Table, grid, whatever format you want, look at it, whatever you want. And it's like, that's not what really anyone who wants to do. I just want to come in and look at this over the last 12 months because I can. Like, no, that is not, but that is the thing that they had built. And this was a term he used. And I just realized that, sometimes I think this in my head. I don't want me to say that to a client that's what it is. But this term, I've used it sometimes, and people are like, "Oh, I know what you mean." Like it's just like all this stuff, and there's no insight here. And to me, this is usually a design problem. It's not it's not a technology problem. You have all the data. You have all this stuff there. Let's figure out what someone actually wants to do with it. What is the business problem? What does their users need? Like, how do we slide it into their normal work? And how do we make their life better? That is the designer's lens on it. You will get the business value if you get that part right. Because humans are part of the business, as we talked about. There's no entity called the business.
There is no entity called the business. You're right. And I think it's just a generic term now. But yes,
sure.
It's people motivated. It's people centered.
Yep.
And therefore it's got to be people. I remember going back to my I'm old, Brian. So how many years ago was it now? Oh gosh, I don't even want to say, over 20 years now. We did something called human computer interaction.
Yep.
HCI, for example. In those days, they were talking about that style of thinking about how you would not just interact with interact with the product itself, but interact with all those people around you, and interact with with the way that the solution works. I mean, that's over 20, 30 years old, probably older.
Sure.
So what dropped? What happened for that to become quite in a way lost in this whole thing?
It's still valid if some people want to use the. I don't really care about the terms. I mean, the design has. I mean, I've had, as a designer, when I was a staff designer before I started designing for analytics, I had web designer, information architect, UX lead, director of design and user experience, product designer, product design. Most of us are doing this. CX, that's the new one.
Yes, that's the new one. Yeah.
Guess what? It's UX. Okay, like some of these divisions, they just don't matter. Like, these terminology doesn't matter, and that's a problem with the design field, in my opinion. Is that, and part of this is, like, it's a new industry. I mean, it's only 20, 30 years old at this point. It's still figuring itself out, and the web moves so fast. Like, web design is now very much kind of a marketing kind of activity. Product design is a very different kind of almost systems engineering oriented approach to design, where we're thinking holistically about how entire products are built. That, a product designer would be thinking about not just like this, forecasting tool and model that's being built, but all the way out to how does it get adopted? What happens to the old thing that was there? All the edge cases, how does it move into the business? All of this stuff, we would be mapping these things out. Actually, journey mapping and service blueprints are two of the ways. When you were asking about workflow earlier, this is one of the way that I like to get teams to do it, because it's visual, and it helps us see. It helps us for the first time sometimes see just where the gaps and opportunities are, but also just literally mapping something out. It's like, wow, look at this thing. Like, this is what it takes for them to make a buying decision about carrots for all these grocery stores. Like, oh my gosh, like, why are they doing this by hand here? We could totally build a thing to help them do that.
Yeah.
But no one had ever stopped and looked at it from 10,000
And
feet, you know?
yeah, and I think most people don't do that because they're just worried with this little
Yep.
process here. And
Yep.
then, and as I often, walk into organizations and say, listen, what I want to do is, I was speaking to somebody the other day and I said, I'd like to understand what the business processes are. I said, oh, yes, that's fine. But, and I was talking about strategy and I said, well, I'm not going to, he asked me the question, are you a BA? And I said, no, I'm not a BA. I'm not going to build them for you, but I want
Yeah.
to know where the handoffs are
Yeah.
because whatever
Yep.
chunk is happening between,
Yeah.
business processes don't stop in finance, business processes don't stop in operations, business processes don't
Yeah.
stop in, sales. They
Yeah.
go from there, they go to the next handoff, they go to the next person, they go to the
Yeah.
next person.
Yeah.
And along that chain, there is so much inefficiency. So
Yeah.
how can we help that and understand, as you said, where the opportunities and, areas of, to make it more optimized
Yeah.
or to understand what insight can be, taken from that, or if it's a handoff with a customer or whatever it might be. But
Mm-hmm.
no one really kind of gets that view of the world, which is still quite troubling for me. But anyway, that's probably a whole new conversation.
Well, yeah, I think designers do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the difference
Yes.
between business
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
process and design
Yeah.
is that we would be thinking of it at the individual user's level, not that this department sends the sheet to that department who loads the insurance claim into the system
Correct.
that does that. Who is doing that
Yes,
stuff?
who is doing that? Exactly.
Yeah, we would be
Yes.
looking at it from that
Yes.
perspective
yeah.
and trying to improve the business process by improving the people part of it, not
Likewise.
just, that's how.
And that's why I think, even from my perspective, just thinking about that from a modeling perspective and just saying,
Yeah.
how do I model a business? I want to know all of that. There's no
Yeah.
point in me just sitting there and saying, well, this,
Yeah.
this bit goes from here to there, because I don't know everything else that's
Right.
under that layer, the complexities. And that's often where the hidden, where there's nuggets of improvement that,
Right.
you can help. Listen, I know that we're running out of time. One last question. Do we need to inject a product owner into every single analytical project or data science project that is being kicked off in a company?
No, I don't think so. This is I think this is something where the team has to feel like either this is really strategic or this enabling capability seems to be being used a lot. Like we're building this little tool to do this this thing that kind of felt like this one-off thing, but now every project needs a little cleansing or a little whatever. That's when it starts to feel like maybe it needs that kind of product owner, product love, so to speak, and a different kind of lens on it. I don't think every project necessarily needs it, because the goal is not to put another tax or another layer of bureaucracy. It's to get to a better outcome sooner. But this is a management decision, right? Is this a strategic thing? Is this just a little enabling functionality that we made over here? Those are hard to generalize.
I get that. And I guess you've got to look at that as well when you kick it off and say, how far does it reach into the organization, or is it just very much maybe the use case is just to improve one part of the process, as you say. Well, look, I think we've had a good conversation. I think we'll probably talk a lot longer around.
Yeah, this is super great.
Design
great
thinking and so on. But listen, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And good luck with everything. And
Likewise.
just thank you for everything and your chat today.
Yeah, it was great
Cheers.
to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.